We're going to have you open it up for us. I think we're ready to go. Brenda, are you around? Uh-oh.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
You want to frame it just, opening words, title and all, and then I can give a welcome.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. So good morning. This is the orientation first meeting of technical advisory committees for the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Program and rulemaking project. And this will maybe the only time that we have all the TACs together. There may be one more time toward the end that we'll do this. You will see it's 60 plus people that are on all the TACs together. So it's a big group this morning. I'll go over the meeting in a little bit and sort of how we'll run the show, but we appreciate you all being here and looking forward to it. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. Deb Myhoff, Communitas. I'm one of the consultants on the project, and I'll be facilitating this meeting and some of the TAC meetings in the future. And we're really grateful to have you here, Brenda, to welcome this group.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, I'm Brenda Bateman. I'm the director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I haven't had a chance to meet all of you yet. Some I have, and others I'm looking forward to getting to know better through this process. I just wanted to take a moment this morning. I know you have a busy agenda, so I just wanted to take a moment to jump in here and welcome everybody on behalf of the department, and also extend to you my personal gratitude for the work you're about to do. So thank you in advance. I just wanted to let you know that you've been selected for your expertise that you bring to what can be a very technical, very detailed discussion. But you also bring your personal perspectives and your humanity. A lot of the folks who are going to benefit from this work are not solely defined by their need for housing, but they are going to need other things as part of this process as well. They're going to need a community that can provide to them security and safety and health, a place that can get them access to work and school and food and recreation, and maybe most of all, a sense of community. So not to overwhelm you or anything, but this is a very big topic, more than just housing our folks here in Oregon. And I'm so pleased that you are all turning your attention and your talents and your expertise to this. Wanted to thank you, and I'll be around if anybody needs anything today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're so grateful to have you here. So I will just give a couple of minutes here to introduce the full team that we have assembled at DLCD and on the consultant team that's here today. There's a larger group beyond this. And then I'll give a little recap of the agenda, and then we're going to get at it. But let's do introductions really quickly. Madeline, do you want to go ahead and give it a start?
Yeah, thank you, Deb. Good morning, everyone. My name is Madeline Barron. I'm a senior project manager here at ECHO Northwest. ECHO is the prime consultant lead for some of the rulemaking processes. So Deb and Kearns and West are on our team. We'll be expanding that with additional TAC facilitators. Lorelei Gentinen, our company president, will also be involved. My colleague Scott Goodman is on the phone as well, or on the call. And Lorelei wasn't able to join right away. She'll be here later. So thank you, Deb.
Great. Thank you so much. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll go to DLCD?
Hi, all. I'm Scott Goodman. As Madeline was saying, with ECHO Northwest, I'm an associate here and will be supporting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ethan, do you want to kick it off for DLCD?
Sure. Thanks, Deb. Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I'm the manager of the Housing Division at the Department of Land Conservation Development. I'm really excited for this group to kind of get this orientation today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that we'll have over the next year or 2 years with you all. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Ingrid Caudell, who you all have been receiving emails from, is helping run the show today, including trying to get the live stream working properly.
It's okay, Deb. Sorry, I just got word it is working. It just doesn't show up for me, but apparently it is there. Sorry. Morning, everybody. Ingrid Cordell, Advisory Committee and Public Records Coordinator. And am I popcorning or?
I can go ahead and do it.
All right.
We'll make sure we get everyone here.
Thank
Thea.
you.
Yes.
Sorry, did I hear my name?
Yes, please.
Hi all, Thea Croman. I'm a housing policy analyst here with the department and will be helping to lead the work on the HATAC, the Housing Advisory Housing Accountability Technical Committee. All of the acronyms floating around in my brain. So hi, it's great to meet you all, and looking forward to digging into some really fun and interesting and complex questions. Pass it back to you, Deb.
Wonderful. And how about Sean?
Hi, folks. Sean Edging, he, him pronouns, housing planner at DLCD, support on the Housing Accountability Technical Advisory Committee. Good to be here.
Sean and Mari.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maddie. I use she or they pronouns. I'm a housing planner with the department as well. Also really great to see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. And I'm excited to, lean on the expertise in this room. I'll be the lead for the Needs and Production Technical Advisory Committee. Great to see you all.
Thank you. And how about Celestina?
Thanks, Deb. Good morning, everybody. Celestina Teva, she and they pronouns. I am also a housing planner with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I will be supporting Mari and you all on the Needs and Production Technical Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Karen.
Good morning and buenos dias. Karen Villan Chapman. I also use Karen, that's just fine. She, her pronouns. I'm part of the team that will be supporting the Capacity and Urbanization Technical Advisory Committee.
Great, thank you. And Madeline Phillips, are you there, Maddie? Oh, there you are.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Madeline Phillips, and I'm the Public Facilities Planner. I'll be working with the Capacity and Urbanization Technical Advisory Committee.
Great, and Jenna.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenna Hughes, she, her pronouns. I am the Housing and Growth Management Analyst with DLCD, and I will be supporting the Capacity and Urbanization TAC.
Wonderful. And how about Anita?
Thanks, Deb. Good morning, everybody. Anita Yap, she, they pronouns with Multicultural Collaborative. I'm a consultant providing equity advice, and just to note that there's new requirements now in rulemaking, both from the commission, but also from the state for equity findings and requirements. So we'll be working through that with you all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I see that we have a LCDC Commissioner Liaison, Alan Lazo here. Alan, do you want to address the group or introduce yourself? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Thanks, Deb. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alan Lazo. You see him pronouns. I'm a LCDC Commissioner representing the Portland metropolitan area. I think I'll be predominantly sitting in the Needs and Production TAC, but recognize how vital the work that we're going to be all doing, digging into the details at the TAC level will be. We spent the last earlier this month a couple of meetings in the RAC process, and really looking forward to this process to continue to move forward this work on ONA that has been going on now for the last 4 or 5 years, and really appreciate the help of you all, the expertise in moving us toward the finish line on creating a more equitable housing distribution in the state for every person who lives here in our state. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for being here, Commissioner. Really appreciate that. Did I miss anyone on the DLCD team, or are there any other commissioners here I'm not aware of? Are we good? Excellent. Thank you all. When we get to TAC meetings, when you're all meeting in smaller groups, we'll have you all do self-introductions. If we did that this morning, it would go on for a really long time. So we'll reserve that until the first meeting of each TAC. Thank you for that. So just to give you an overview about what's going on this morning, the first half of the meeting, the next 45 minutes or so, or maybe it's longer than that, we're going to be giving you some background, some orientation to what it is the charge. Staff are going to be presenting information out. Those of you who've tuned in to the RAC meetings or are on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee itself will have heard some of this, but it never hurts to hear it again. Part of that will also be the charge of the tax and your roles and responsibilities. And Ethan will go over the charter for that this morning. And then we have an exercise for the second half of the meeting to work through each of the TAC topics. And we're really excited to have you all around the table, no matter what TAC you're on, to sort of interface with those TAC topics and have a little bit of a discussion. I'll help facilitate a discussion. We'll also have a whiteboard going and sort of start shaping up and understanding some of the technical aspects of what we're getting into. I think that's it for now for me. I think I'm ready to go ahead and go toward TAC overview, operating principles, how we're going to run the meetings going forward. And that is Ethan.
It is. Thank you, Deb. And again, everybody, my name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I'm the manager of the housing division here at DLCD. Today, like we've been talking about, is really an orientation to this rulemaking process. Lots of folks around the table have either been part of that process or are new to this process. And so in order to kind of ground everybody in what we're collectively working on over the next year or two, is going to be important to kind of have this preliminary conversation. So if you're not new to this process or are part of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, I apologize. Some of this may be redundant, but it's important to have this conversation first to get us all grounded. So next slide, please, Sean. So this is a diagram of all sorts of lines and boxes, but it articulates the kind of decision-making process here when we're talking about rulemaking at a state agency. So, really high level, state agencies implement Oregon administrative rules, which operationalize Oregon legislature policy direction through statute or to operationalize their existing statutory authority of that state agency. So that's the really, really high level. In this particular process, Rulemaking Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Committees, like the folks in the room here today, are advisory to DLCD staff in the process of making final recommendations on Oregon administrative rules to be adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission, which Commissioner Lazo is a part of, and you heard from just earlier. So part of this process is trying to articulate, kind of this decision-making flow. And throughout, as we're kind of envisioning, this process, your role as a technical advisory committee member is somewhat similar but different from the role of a rulemaking advisory committee member in this process. There's going to be lots of back and forth between the two groups, but ultimately those conversations that you all are having as advisory committee members are going to be informative to the DLCD team who are in the room here today in making those, developing the full scope and thinking through those implementation issues and those operationalization issues that you all are highlighting in this process as you see it from your perspective. So your advice in this process and your advisement is going to be absolutely critical so that we collectively as a group can recommend rules to the Land Conservation Development Commission at the end of this process. So next slide, please. All right. So in the context of making some of these Oregon administrative rule adoption decisions, the Land Conservation Development Commission receives direction from the state legislature through, in our case here, HB 2001 and further 2889. There are principles, directions, priorities kind of articulated as part of the adoption of that legislation, but also the Land Conservation Development Commission has further refined and detailed out their direction to DLCD staff in how to adopt these rules and what those rules should entail. So as part of a meeting that they held in July of this year, the commission initiated this rulemaking process, and by so doing adopted this charge, which kind of provides additional guidance to DLCD staff and to the technical advisory committee members here. I won't read all of the words on this screen here, but it's included in your operating principles document as part of your meeting packet item number 2, if you're interested in reading through that. But really what this does is articulate some of those further core beliefs of LCDC in how we're adopting these rules here. So thinking about all of these major elements of the rulemaking process and fleshing out some of those high priority, high value items that the commission's really looking to us and to you all to incorporate in this rulemaking process. Next slide, please. So in addition to adopting that charge, which describes the Land Conservation Development Commission's kind of purpose for this rulemaking, they've also separately have had consideration or conversations about how generally, not specific to housing, not specific to any particular policy area at the department, but how generally the commission is expecting DLC staff to consider elements of equity and racial justice as part of our rulemaking process. And so by having that conversation, they've articulated a set of, or this kind of framework, equitable decision-making framework for DLCD staff to consider as we're kind of filtering our rules to the commission and kind of highlighting particular categories or articulating kind of expectations of DLCD staff and how we're considering these rules. And so this equitable decision-making framework is important to kind of show to technical advisory committee members as a description of, kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit and describing, how we as DLCD staff are going to be considering your input in this process and filtering it through this lens of equitable decision-making so that we can, provide those rules to the commission that meet their expectations. So as part of this equitable decision-making framework, there's kind of these 8 categories of decision-making that we're kind of holding close as part of this process, focusing on how individual rules are addressing historical inequities, how they're providing benefits or how they're burdening particular priority populations, how we're holding ourselves accountable, how we're going through and measuring and evaluating outcomes in this process. So these are kind of the framework by which DLCD will be taking your comments into consideration in the development of rules. So next slide, please, Sean. With all of that context and how we're kind of making decisions, we can kind of then further describe to you all the kind of operating procedures and kind of the charter of this group, which further defines roles between the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, which defines roles between the DLCD team and the consultant team and the technical advisory committees, and how they are all working together to actually get to that end process at the end of this rulemaking process. So next slide, please, Sean. All right, so I've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but the roles between the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and the technical advisory committees are distinct, right? There's a reason why we're holding these spaces in different venues. And part of that is because the task at hand is really large, right? HB 2001-2889, addressing things related to land use and housing and how the statewide planning program works to address, be a solution to the housing crisis as the state is experiencing it, is a large task, right? And one advisory committee is not enough to tackle that big task. And so in order to kind of make the workload a little bit more bearable and actually hold space and time to have the conversations that we feel like we need to have, we've got this structure of a rulemaking advisory committee, which is intended to focus on higher level policy and guidance towards these, broader directionally kind of implementation elements of HB 2001. These are intended to be high-level policy conversations. They're not in the weeds. That is the work of the technical advisory committees, these groups here that you all are a part of. We're really hoping that you all can bring your technical your experience in practicing housing, whether it's from the land use planning sphere, from building housing, from being an advocate, to really help us get down into the weeds and think through those really tough conversations about, how might this actually work? What are the rules that we're actually adopting to make sure that we're achieving the outcomes that we're intending to achieve? And I think throughout this process, there's going to be this relationship between the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and the technical advisory committees, where we're having the deep technical conversations at the technical advisory committee level. And then we're coming back to the Rulemaking Advisory Committee to kind of check in and have those, bigger policy conversations and work through alternatives and, raise questions to the individual groups. Next slide, please, Sean. All right, so let's talk a little bit about responsibilities and expectations. I think these are, somewhat basic here, and kind of just an articulation of best practice in terms of how you are engaging in kind of a public body and advisory space. And really, I think what it kind of boils down to is acting in good faith. This process is going to be one where we're having deep conversations and conversations about how either we're changing the way that we've done things for a long time or trying to implement new programs. And folks are going to have lots of feelings about how we're doing that. So the expectation from the get-go is that folks are considering the viewpoints of others and not focusing on the policy, not on the person, focus on the issue and not on individuals. And the second one here is that this process, while we are talking in the span of months and years, that actually in actuality is not a whole lot of time to answer the questions that we're tasked with answering. And so we're asking folks to come prepared to the meetings, to be ready to have the conversations and not rely on DLCD staff in those meetings to advance the conversation, and rather the materials that we're providing in advance are intended to be fodder for discussion, questions, and conversation in the actual meetings themselves. And then finally, always offering the opportunity for folks to ask DLCD staff and anybody on the consultant team for assistance, right? Our purpose in this process is to set you up to be able to have the conversations that you are going to be having in this process, and empowering you as a valued member of these advisory committees to really be an active participant in this process. So we're here to offer any support and assistance to you as you're going through this process. And if you're new, ask the questions that seem like they are, simple questions. Those are going to be really helpful for not just you in this process, but likely everybody else in the process. So please do continue to ask those questions and ask for assistance and support where you need it. Next slide, please. All right, so I want to kind of just caveat this slide to say that it is an old description of the schedule, but I think it kind of highlights a little bit of a bigger picture as we're looking at this process. So the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and HB 2001 and the implementation of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is a long-term implementation, systematic type change, reform to the Goal 10 planning process, and the timeline to get ready for kind of the kickoff inaugural date of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which is January 1st of 2025, is really for all intents and purposes, right around the corner. And so we have a lot of work to do with you all over the next couple months here to get ready for that date. And so we'll work through with you all a little bit later into 2024 on refining some of these schedules and highlighting milestones in this process to make sure that you're well aware of like what's around the corner and the things that we're trying striving for in each of the subsequent meetings that we're having as a group. So just note that we're talking long-term here, but the work in terms of implementation of the program, but the work here of the technical advisory committees and the rulemaking advisory committees is on a relatively shorter time period. Next slide, please, Sean. All right. So what are we even doing? We'll talk about the purpose of this meeting today is really to dive into these three major policy areas, and you all being engaged and interested in this process are probably somewhat already aware of what these policy issues are, but I'll go through them just really quickly for the purposes kind of setting up the conversation. HB 2001 and 2889 and the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Program in general requires DLCD to kind of answer three major questions, focus on three major topic areas. The first, needs and production. This is really about how the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, the methodology of analyzing housing need at a statewide level and allocating that down to local governments. How does that actually work, and what are the implications of that under the Goal 10 process? There's also in statute some direction and changes to the way that cities are expected to engage in that Goal 10 process, including integrating principles of the Fair Housing Act, affirmatively furthering fair housing into the Goal 10 planning process. So we're really excited about that one. The second is housing accountability. So, and as part of this process, envisioning achieving outcomes and focusing on monitoring results. There's also a follow-on conversation to that process of what happens if we're not meeting those metrics or we're underperforming. There should be some discussion and articulation. In fact, there is in HB 2001 an articulation of a program that focuses on that review and, as part of that process, eventual enforcement activities or accountability as part of that conversation of making sure that we're continually making good faith efforts and progress towards our targets. The third element of this is related to capacity and urbanization. So when we're talking about housing and planning for more housing, we're in Oregon, the conversation inevitably leads to the urban growth boundary and the impacts of changes upstream on the downstream impacts of the urban growth boundary. So we'll spend an entire technical advisory group focusing on those housing and urbanization related elements of this work. Next slide, please, Sean. All right, we've already seen this graphic, but I think it kind of, given all of the things that I've just talked about in this section of the agenda, I think it's important to kind of reiterate that there's going to be a highly iterative, collaborative process here. Those questions that I've kind of just highlighted in the last slide are big questions and are the result of years and years of conversation, and there's still yet more to go. And so there's going to be back and forth between the technical advisory committee and the rulemaking advisory committee. DLCD staff are going to be proposing options and highlighting where there's alternatives and what's in and out of the scope and authority of the department and what's in and out of the statutory obligations of the department under HB 2001. And I think while this graphic is a little complex in how it's described, I think fundamentally I'm kind of viewing this process as really one big conversation that's going to get us towards those goals and outcomes that we've already kind of articulated through HB 2001 and the Land Conservation Development's charge. And, as part of the Technical Advisory Committee group here, I'll say that this is where a lot of the work that is actually going to be done here. The Rulemaking Advisory Committee process is thinking on those, like I said, bigger picture policy questions, but it's really the technical advisory committees that are going to be working on what do the rules actually say? What are the actual words on the page that are going to be the implementable elements of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis in HB 2001? So I'm frankly really looking forward to engaging in those conversations with you all throughout the next year. I think that concludes the slides that I have, Deb.
Great. Thank you so much, Ethan. Really appreciate it. TAC members, any need for clarification? Any questions about the process or equity framework? Ariel.
Hi, thanks. I apologize, my camera's off today. I'm under the weather. I'm Ariel Nelson with League of Oregon Cities. I did have a question on the slide related to OHCS's work and equity work. Could you go back over that? Is there going to be a TAC or a RAC or an engagement process with that? And how does that fit in? I might have missed it. I apologize. I'm trying to go between screens with materials and everything.
All good. Thanks, Ariel. I know you're juggling a lot. The work that OHCS is doing under HB 2001 related to considering things, about the equity dashboard or the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis methodology that is within the wheelhouse of the Office of Economic Analysis, has its own process. This is not those two agencies have been directed through HB 2001 to engage in conversations related to those elements of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis program. That is not part of the conversation of these three technical advisory committees or the rulemaking advisory committee within the DLCD conversation. We will be playing a consultant and advisory role to those other two agencies in their process, just as they are going to be playing an advisory and stakeholder role in our process. So those conversations are, off the table as part of this work, we're still going to be engaging in those conversations. And I think we'll, throughout this process, be able to kind of bring some of that, knowledge and conversation into this space. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it here.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. That's helpful. Do you know, or I don't know if someone's on from OHCS, like what that process will look like, or if this group or other interested parties, particularly, my clients, the cities who are implementing and held accountable to the standards, will we have an opportunity to engage or inform that development of that process?
Yeah, I think they're working on, I see Sean wants to jump in here, but my understanding is that they're working on getting that process set up and they're just not quite there yet on terms of the exact way that they're doing that. But Sean, please.
Yeah. No, I'll just add that. So this is a process that's occurring parallel to the rulemaking advisory committee process, right? Understandably, we can't adopt rules about what OHCS or DAS does, but it does have an intersection with our work. So, right, there's going to be kind of this intersection and nexus between this work. So there'll be kind of a back and forth relationship there, but it is a parallel process that's happening that OHCS is leading. They haven't developed out their full plan yet. I think they're still working on getting under contract, but that will be forthcoming, right? There will definitely be opportunities to engage in that process, to have conversations with OHCS and DAS about what the regulatory methodology looks like.
Thanks. Do you know who the lead staff contact for that would be if I want to reach out at OHCS?
That would be Megan Bolton.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ariel. All right, I'm going to keep us moving along here. Damien, questions about the framework, equity framework, operating principles of the RAC rulemaking?
Good morning. Thank you. I had a question on the equity framework and what the team's expectations are for the TAC in terms of using this framework. If this is something where we should become familiar with it as a tool as we're looking at work products, or is this something where the team is going to be developing work products for us to review, and then part of that will be, here's how we incorporated the equity framework in developing this for your review?
It's a really, really good question, Damien. So, it's definitely going to be the latter. I think it would be great if you all as technical advisory committee members gave it a review and, dove into that a little bit, because that would, I think maybe inform how you might best be able to participate in this process, knowing that DLCD is going to be, using that as the framework by which we're making recommendations to LCDC. I think that would be beneficial or really help you kind of engage in that process in the way that's going to translate really nicely into how we're kind of working on our deliverables.
And I think we'll be framing up questions and discussions for the TACs using that framework. So that'll sort of be embedded in that. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Michael.
I had the exact same question as Ariel. I had the same follow-up. Thank you so much, Ariel. I just wanted to emphasize from the HATAC perspective, yeah, we're going to be trying to figure out how to hold accountable people to these equity metrics that have yet to be determined. So thanks a lot.
Yep. Roger that. Thank you, Michael. Samantha. Oh, you're on mute, Samantha. Oh, we still can't hear you. No. Okay, thank you. You'll put it in the chat and we'll convey that. Thank you. Unless there's any more questions about process and equity framework, I'm going to go ahead and move us along and have Sean. Actually, Ethan, was there one more thing you wanted to add? Sorry. Okay. Cool. I'm going to move us along. Sean's going to give us most of you are intimately familiar with the sort of legislative direction and the goals we're working with, but Sean's going to give us some high points about what the TAC specifically will be working on and just sort of get us in the headspace before we dig in a little deeper. So go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Deb. And yeah, no, definitely keying in. Sorry for those that this is repetitive and sorry for those that this is not enough, right? This is really kind of more just a reminder on the legislative context and direction. I know we have some RAC members who've already heard this before 2 days ago, as well as other folks who are pretty deeply familiar with, the bill and just Goal 10 and Goal 14 generally. So treating it a little bit more like a reminder, please ask clarifying questions at the end, just recognizing I'm not going to go into detail on a lot of this. So yeah, no, but thank you guys for understanding. All right, so let's start with the just kind of reminder on the legislative context, why we're here, why we're doing this work. This is a process that's really focused around the implementation of Goal 10, which, as a reminder, articulates a responsibility that state and local governments plan for an abundance and diversity of affordable housing options for their community members throughout the state. And it's really focused on reframing the implementation of Goal 10, specifically through local requirements around housing capacity analyses and housing production strategies to emphasize housing production, affordability, and choice, and to affirmatively further fair housing. And we'll talk more about that just in the next couple of slides and just throughout this entire meeting. But just as a reminder, right, we're working from a historic basis where the implementation of Goal 10 was really focused on how much land a city had within their urban growth boundary, what it was zoned to, and whether that was enough to accommodate 20 years of growth. It was very much an accounting exercise. And in 2019, it kind of expanded with the introduction of the housing production strategy to think more, broadly about a range of strategies that local governments can consider over the next 6 years in the metro or 8 years outside of the metro to encourage the production of housing, right? But still kind of this more of an add-on and really had that focus just on that accounting exercise and land within the UGB. And the policy doesn't necessarily change, right, those individual components. Cities still do housing capacity analyses, they still do housing production strategies, but it really kind of changes the overall structure of the system to refocus on that implementation, that nexus of housing production, affordability, and choice, implementing policies and removing barriers that can impede achieving those goals, and really kind of stepping up the state role in terms of not only implementing a methodology at the statewide level that kind of has this shared responsibility for all local communities, but also setting in this environment where we're articulating goals, we're tracking and evaluating those goals. And when we're not meeting those goals, we're evaluating what's going on, like what are the barriers that are happening at the state and local level that are inhibiting our ability to reach our goals, right? And right, so that's kind of the overall, broad framework. I'll give a reminder just on the details of the bill. In the packet, we actually provided a kind of plain language summary of the bill language rather than just handing you, 100 pages of bill language. We tried to kind of break it down, but just as like a quick reminder of like what's in the bill, it kind of consists of 2 major components, and it's implementing recommendations that we were directed at DLCD to provide to the legislature for the 2023 session on issues around, the implementation of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, but also working towards these shared goals of housing production, affordability, and choice. The 2 bills implement some, but not all of those recommendations that were provided to the legislature. In particular, it really implements everything around the local implementation of Goal 10, but it doesn't focus on those broader statewide pictures around, coordinated state funding, coordination between different state agencies, looking at and evaluating the broader state barriers to production of housing. But those are definitely still considerations that the legislature and the governor's office are grappling with and ongoing, but that conversation is still happening in the legislative sphere. But they did implement policies around the implementation of Goal 10. Without going into too much detail about the bill, again, definitely review that summary that we provided. You could kind of break down the bill into two major components. There's an analytical component, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis itself, and then the Goal 10 implementation side of it. So on the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, this is a joint responsibility between the Office of Economic Analysis at the Department of Administrative Services, DAS, as well as Oregon Housing and Community Services. So DAS or OEA kind of does the math. They run the numbers on what the need looks like in the state. They assign housing production targets. They make allocations to local governments to have kind of a shared responsibility for need, right? They do all the math, right? And OHCS is all about the tracking the outcomes. They establish a housing production dashboard where we kind of have all of these targets and we track our progress towards meeting those targets. And then they also provide information on kind of equity indicators, right? There's kind of some broad direction around there. We talked about this occurring kind of in a parallel process that OHCS will be leading. They're still in the process of developing that. There'll be definitely a nexus with a lot of the work that we do, but we're not, here to rule make about what OHCS or DAS does in the implementation of that methodology, right? Just as a reminder. We also have the part that we're going to be really focusing on, which is all about that implementation of Goal 10, right? I mentioned that it doesn't necessarily change the individual components of what local governments do to fulfill their Goal 10 obligations, but it really reframes the focus of implementation on that housing production, affordability, and choice. It includes a very significant rulemaking component, and we'll talk about those specific issues as we go through this meeting later on. But really kind of that reframing that is the focus of our work as part of this. So I just also want to provide maybe a reminder or a quick refresher on like the individual components themselves that we do at the local government level, and maybe talk a little bit about how they're kind of changing around the specifics of how they do it. I won't spend too much time on this, again, just recognizing a limitation on time. But there's kind of a few different components that we'll be looking into on this implementation side. One is the housing capacity analysis, right? This is that document that's really focused on whether a city has enough land zoned to sufficient capacity within an urban growth boundary to accommodate 20 years of projected need, right? And so this kind of consists of, you can think of it as consisting of two major components. There's a need component, then there's kind of an inventory of land component. And really kind of the combination of these determines whether or not a city has enough land to accommodate need. To start on the needs side of it, historically, this was a local projection based on a population projection made by Portland State University. That's changing to be an allocation that is provided by the state, right? So there's this Oregon Housing Needs Analysis that's going to be conducted at the statewide level. Every community is going to receive a share of the overall need in the state. And then they go through a process to translate that. They'll get a number of units and affordability thresholds for units, but they have a responsibility then to translate that into the types, characteristics, and location of housing, right, that are specific at the local level, thinking about things like, size of units, where you want units to be located, say near schools or near jobs, thinking about characteristics like accessibility features, aging in place, all these different components that affect, what the resultant housing mix and characteristics look like. Once they do that, they go to a BLI process. This is essentially taking all of the land that exists within a city's urban growth boundary and kind of characterizing its development capacity, considering a lot of things like, whether that land is developed already or not, whether it's vacant, partially vacant, and also considering different constraints, right? Are there things that would inhibit the development of housing on these lands? And, kind of going through this kind of more technical process to determine, what is this kind of capacity that we can expect to see on our lands within our urban growth boundary? When you compare these kind of two factors, the needed housing versus the buildable lands that you have within your UGB, right, you determine whether or not you have sufficient land to accommodate that 20-year need that you have identified in the ONA. And if you're short, if you have a deficiency, you are required by law to address it. And it generally can be addressed one of two ways. There's this bureaucratic term we have for efficiency measures, which is essentially build more housing on less land. And then there's the urban growth boundary adjustment, right? And generally cities kind of do some combination of this. You start with efficiency measures, and when you exhaust those, then you move into an urban growth boundary adjustment, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, I want to take a quick detour to talk about the housing production strategy, which is now the central focus or focal point of the implementation of Goal 10. And this is all about the actions that a city plans on taking to promote the development of housing, to promote housing production, affordability, and choice, and to affirmatively further fair housing. That is a new addition from the policy, right? This kind of integration with AFFH that we'll be talking about kind of later on in this meeting. But essentially, this is a process by which, a city kind of contextualizes their need. They think about the needs of community members. They talk with, members in their community as well as, say, the building community, and they develop a set of strategies and timelines. Like, this is what our game plan is over the next 6 years in the metro or 8 years outside of the metro that we're going to do to achieve these goals of promoting housing production, affordability, and choice, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. And of course, they consider this in light of the fair and equitable housing outcomes, which was a piece kind of before this integration of AFFH. And then DLCD reviews these housing production strategies for their sufficiency, right? These are kind of binding documents that, cities are required to address the need or adopt actions to address the need as part of this program. So we review that for sufficiency. All right, so as I mentioned in the housing capacity analysis, once you identify a deficiency and kind of exhaust those efficiency measures to, build more housing on less land, then you move into urban growth boundary expansion territory, right? To address that kind of additional nexus of need. And that's when we move into goal 14, which is all about determining where you make that expansion into. Actually, I would like to invite Karen Nguyen Chapman to kind of just speak briefly to this, if she's online.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So for those of you that are on the capacity and urbanization TAC, this is where we'll really be delving in. A lot of you are very familiar with this, but just for the benefit of us all, the Urban Growth Boundary Amendment and the studies and analysis required, it really determines where a city might plan for growth and how they're going to plan for growth to accommodate that identified land need. Some of us have been through these processes, and there's three large bucket areas with multiple different considerations under each. A study area is established, usually comprising of land within a minimum distance of the current UGB. It includes all of your reserved lands designated as urban reserves. It looks at how practical it is to provide public services, if there's any natural hazards, lands with specific designations for natural scenic. There's a variety of different exclusions that are considered under what is the study area for a potential amendment to the UGB. Within that study area, there's a prioritization, and in statute, the state has prioritized lands to be considered. Again, the reserves or exception lands are at the top. I think there's a couple jurisdictions that might have some marginal lands that are considered. And then there's a pretty rigorous consideration of farm and forest lands, if it's primarily high value farmland or not, and how that priority goes to consider where that growth might happen. Lastly, as you're determining where that amendment is going to occur, what lands are included potentially within your urban growth boundary, looking at location factors of what is most efficient to accommodate your land needs, provision of your public facilities. So I know we have a lot of expertise in the room around expansion areas to a city and how public services, roads, sewers, and water. We also look at social consequences, energy, economic, environmental consequences, and compare that. And there's an assessment to really look at what is the compatibility. As you expand out, how are those uses going to be compatible with what's existing adjacent to your new expansion area? And that's pretty high level, but I do want to highlight for the TAC that we will have many conversations and multiple meetings to really delve into the details of every single point that I went through pretty quickly. I think I'm going to hand it back over. We might be able to take, Deb, remind me, are we a good spot for questions and answers, clarification?
Yeah, that would be good. Do you have one more thing?
Let's take a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, any clarifications, things you have questions about?
And if there's none right now, no worries. I feel like we gave you a lot of information.
Dig in some more.
We can dig in just a little bit more on some of our legislative rulemaking guidance that we received.
Great. Okay, let's carry on then.
Right. Let's carry on. And we'll have a period for clarifying questions at the end too. I'm going to pivot into talking about the scope that was outlined in the bill. Right. So, and I won't talk about all of these. They're definitely included in that summary. But the legislature did prescribe us kind of like specific direction on what they want us to look at. They directed us to kind of look into this full system, the housing capacity analysis, housing production strategy, goal 14, and the relevant kind of rules, guidance documents that we provide to local governments. And they gave us some principles that we're supposed to adhere to in terms of promoting housing production, affordability, and choice, doing all these different, working towards these different aspirations, and then also prioritizing certain things like clarity and certainty for local governments, capacity building, that type of thing, right? As we go through it. And again, I won't talk about those all that much, but they have the scope that we're directed to do that LCDC then operationalized through that rulemaking charge that Ethan kind of mentioned previously. The way that we kind of have taken this, thinking about this more broadly is thinking about our role in the broader context of the housing crisis. I sometimes use this just as kind of a reminder of like the scope and the time that we have. Of course, everything that we're going to be talking about is all about the broader picture on housing. There's a lot of interconnection, and we're going to need a lot of work, policy interventions and investments at local, state, and federal levels to address the housing crisis in total. And we absolutely will need to explore that complexity, right? There's going to be a lot of intersections with other places of work that will affect the work that we do on both the RAC and the individual tax. But we do have a job, right? Our job is a smaller part of that overall picture in addressing the total housing crisis. And so, we shouldn't lose sight of that. We shouldn't try to address it all and address everything, especially those places that don't necessarily have that statutory nexus or we don't have statutory authority to address, right? Just as a quick reminder, but let's get into talking through some of those topic areas. Ethan had provided this before. The way that we kind of took this direction that we were provided and operationalized it, we kind of divided it into these three different kind of topic areas in terms of housing accountability, needs and production, and housing capacity and urbanization, which we'll talk about again in greater detail as we kind of go through this meeting. And what we kind of have done, we've done a little bit of thinking on the back end to kind of take that legislative direction and translate it into some very critical policy issues that we know we need to address in order to fulfill the kind of statutory direction that was prescribed to us in the bill, right? Everything that we're going to be talking about in these different kind of individual components, we know we have to address, right, in order to operationalize the legislative direction. But I also want to mention too, these are not like exhaustive. This is not like the only thing that we can potentially look at. I think we've heard a lot of examples of other places where we'll, kind of need to evaluate and think about the kind of nexus with rules that are, maybe not explicitly called out in the bills, but they have a nexus to the work. I think examples that we've heard, and again, this is non-exhaustive, we have an ability to kind of, go through this and identify these. We've definitely seen a lot of ambiguity around Goal 10 implementation in the metro region, especially now that urban unincorporated portions of metro, may have a responsibility to plan for housing upcoming in the short session. We've heard about small and capacity constrained jurisdictions, which has really been highlighted by Tillamook County's Senate Bill 406, which enrolls them in the program. We've heard often on the climate friendly integration, right? And how do we operationalize a lot of those pieces to ensure that we're building abundant housing in a way that's climate resilient and climate friendly as directed in the bill. And then also, of course, the intersection with the governor's housing production package, which is a series of, kind of different policies and investments in a much bigger kind of coordinating role at the statewide level, which is, kind of getting at some of those other recommendations, which absolutely has a nexus to this work, right? So, these aren't explicitly called out in the bill, but they definitely have a nexus to the work, right? So these could be other areas where we might need to consider, hey, maybe we need to do something in rulemaking to address these different kind of intersections. With that, I think, I just want to kind of maybe back up and maybe pause a little bit for clarifications and questions. I know we kind of gave a lot there in the scope that we're trying to address a lot. We also have, a job that's been prescribed by the bill.
Yeah, especially, thank you so much, Sean, especially thinking about that sort of bullseye graphic with the things that our legislative direction can cover in the sphere of things that need to happen. Does anyone need clarification on any of the legislative direction or anything Sean and Karin just covered? Excellent. It helps that you all work with this. Most of you work with this every day. Let us take a break and come back at 11:05. So what is that, 8-minute break? And then we're going to dig into the topics of each of the TACs, and we'll have some interactive experiences and some discussion. So it'll be less of us talking and more hearing from you. But but let's take a break till 11:05. Thanks all.